Hey there. Today I am joined by Josh from Advanced R&D once again to discuss the future of Marvel Crisis Protocol as previewed by the developers from Atomic Mass Games over the last mini stravaganza. My name is Nate and welcome to the Gamers Guild. And I think we just dive right into it here. First off, I guess Josh, introduce yourself to anybody who doesn't know you.
Hi, I'm Josh, or Merzane on most things that you're going to see. I've got a podcast called Advanced R&D, where we build lists, and I'm also part of the Turn Zero crew podcast. I'm also one of the people who helps run the online TTS leagues, so if you have any questions about that, you can reach out to me for it.
Cool. So today we are going to be talking about a lot of different highlight reel of the last panel that Atomic Mass Games put on for us, aside from their goodbye and after party, which is just the future of the game and what they see for it, what they are planning for it. And while we didn't get any peeks at characters, new characters, we got a whole lot of other information. So I'm going to real quick go over the things we're going to be talking about, and then we'll dive in a little bit more, give our reactions to these changes. And first is that the tactic card area got an expansion. There is an alter ego rule change. There is a crisis selection rule change, an Infinity Gem rework, and we are finally seeing updated character cards, and we'll talk about all of that again more in depth because it's all very exciting. So, first up is the Team Tactic cards. They are increased from 8 to 10 during roster building. Josh, what do you think?
I think this is an excellent change. I've been asking for something similar. Uh, it's, I think it's really hard right now with so many powerful general cards. Like all you've got, Bitter Rivals, Med Pack, two of your roster slots are probably going to be your restricted cards. It's hard to get a lot of the cool character specific cards that are coming out, like Mysterio's The Grand Finale, Sinister Trap. Well, that's not a character specific one, but it's still hard to fit. Lizard Brain is Monkey Home, or whatever. Monkey Brain is Lizard Home. Um, it's all these, a lot of the Convocation cards that are coming out too. So having two more slots really makes it easier to fit some of those cards that you're more likely to not take every game, but you might possibly take in some games.
Yeah, what I really like about this is it's going to open up the window for more dual affiliation rosters. Because at the moment, only 8 tactic cards, like you still have a core, like 3 that you're bringing, and then maybe 2 depending on your affiliation or your character, which is basically all of your tactic cards at that point, plus having an extra restricted card, yada yada yada. So being able to expand this to 10 makes it so it's going to be a lot easier to look at having dual or maybe even 3 affiliations in a single roster. Because before, one of the limiting factors wasn't in so much in the characters, because there's so many dual affiliated characters, but it's because these tactic cards are so valuable and so hard to fit in. So having 2 extra slots there, I think, will really open it up, and I think it was a very necessary change because of one of the other changes we'll be talking about later.
Yeah, I agree with that too. I think another thing it does is it opens the door for characters like Killmonger. Killmonger kind of wants to bring his card, but a lot of people won't bring him because they don't have room for his card. Because if he can't take Usurp the Throne, then there's better options than Killmonger. But this can potentially open the door for some of those characters that need a card you won't take all the time, or feel like they need a card you won't take all the time. You may consider them a little bit more now that you have the tactics room to fit them in.
Yep, now Scarlet Witch can bring both Whims of Chaos and No More Mutants
Yep, it's
instead of just
I think
one.
I think it's a super positive change
Absolutely.
in every way. I don't think there's any downside to it yet.
I don't. I'm also very glad that they're not opening it up wider. I think 10 is still very restrictive, especially given the ridiculous pool that we've seen at this point.
Right. And they mentioned too in the stream. I haven't watched the whole stream, but I've watched parts of it. It just makes a lot more sense to say you get 10 characters, 10 tactics, than you get 6, 8, 10. So it's a little bit easier to kind of remember for some of the newer players.
And I'm also very excited because it's going to allow for a couple of niche cards to fit in. Things like Psychic Shielding Device and Marked for Death. Both are very good into certain matchups, but you couldn't justify taking them in your 8 because you needed them. You needed those slots for your more guaranteed use cards, but now you can bring those in if you're like, oh man, I'm going up against Web Warriors. Marked for Death needs to be in your 5.
Yep, and there was definitely cards that I would consider when I was list building my ninth, 10th, 11th cards. But, oh man, if I just had another slot or two, or if this card didn't exist, I could fit it in. It's just almost there. It's just not quite there, and now those cards can make it. But
Yeah.
now I'm pretty confident that in the future now I'm going to say things like, "Oh, this would be my 11th card," and "Oh, this would be my 12th card." But I think 10 is going to ease enough of the list building burden that will be a lot less common.
So the next change is the alter ego rule change. And that is, you can now have multiple characters with the same alter ego in your roster, but not on the table at the same time. I will go ahead and additionally say, because it was already brought up on stream, that both playtesters and the chat during their stream tried to justify, oh, well, can I bring multiple of the exact same character, but with different other things because of another change we'll talk about? And no, you can only still bring, like, if you have Spider Man and Amazing Spider Man, you can have one of each of those Peter Parkers, but you can't, for some reason, have two Amazing Spider Mans make up your 10.
Yep. Uh,
Ah.
Another fantastic change.
Yep. I like that there's still the limitation of I can't have both beaters on the table at the same time. Not that I even necessarily would want to, but even more so for, I guess, Web Warriors do really appreciate that. But even Avengers rosters, especially Sam Spam, who likes the Agent Black Widow for being able to do some Doom Prophecy stuff and be absolutely disgusting. You can also look at uh, Two Threat Widow as a viable option for that roster because they really like going wide. She's the only in affiliation too, which makes roster building a lot easier. Uh, Wonderful change, only going to improve things. And while it does make building the roster easier in some regards, it then makes taking your list in the game that much more difficult.
Yeah, and I, I think that going forward we're going to see a lot more copy characters. Um, I think that this is a bit of future proofing as well because they're more able to fit these cool, interesting characters that we've already seen before, like the reskins on them, into a roster when you have a smaller roster, like say Convocation, I think is relatively small.
Relatively.
You can actually have both of your Doctor Stranges. Having a second Doctor Strange doesn't hurt that roster because you can actually fit them both in there, and
Hmm.
you get some tactical flexibility there. And like you said, I was building Web Warriors rosters for me was very hard because I felt like I had to commit to either Peter Parker, and now I don't have to commit in roster building to either Peter Parker, and it makes list building a lot more interesting, a lot more fun, I think,
Hmm.
because I'm not feeling like I'm limited. It feels like they're pulling a lot of the limits off your roster building, so you're more able to be creative with how you with what characters and what options you use.
Yeah. All right. And then the third change we're going to be covering, the crisis selection rule change, is probably the one that's going to affect the game the most, but it's also probably the most controversial of the things, and not even necessarily controversial as it's just going to change the game. So yeah, maybe controversial. I'm trying to butter it up, and I know Josh has a hot take here for me in just a second.
I'm keeping
So
it relatively low temperature. I'm keeping it low temperature, keeping it cool this time.
So, crisis selection will now be randomly choosing one of your three possible cards that you bring instead of discarding one of your three and then choosing from the other two. Talk to me, Josh.
So I'm not a huge fan of this for a few reasons. I understand, or from my understanding, the change is a change to help newer players ease some of the burden of selecting crisis at the beginning of a game, and also to prevent experienced players from getting some of those big spicy turn one plays that create a huge advantage and the game just doesn't get played. I don't really like it even through that, mostly because I feel like one of the most interesting parts of the game is that you get to choose your half of the objective, at least in competitive play. In
Hmm.
casual play, of course, which is the perspective I'm coming from. In casual play, it's totally fine, and you can also just ignore this rule and pick the two crises from your entire collection that you want to play if you really feel like it. So that doesn't bother me. But in a competitive setting, it feels really nice to be able to bring your half of the game to the table,
Hmm.
and this feels a lot less like that. And you could also in list building bring certain crises to counter other affiliations. For example, I brought spider portals to counter Black Order. So if I came across Black Order, I had the potential to drop that crisis on the table and put myself in an advantaged position against a very powerful affiliation. I don't really have that option now, so things like that won't get put into my roster because I only have a low chance of ever having that combination hit. So, and that may be the point, and if so, then they're definitely hitting that right on the mark. But I just think it takes a bit of the competitive edge out of some of the roster building and turn zero aspects of the game away in favor of something that's probably not helping casual play as much as I think uh, is expected.
So I, for one, am concerned about this rule change because one of the things I really did like about the turn zero aspects of Marvel Crisis Protocol was that counter pick of Crisis. So maybe if I see my opponent is playing Asgard and they give me extracts, I want to make sure I don't pick an extraction that has an objective on the middle line because Angela can very easily move up, grab that center one, and move back to a safer position, which kind of just gives Asgard a nice little advantage right out of the gate.
Yeah, and that was actually another point I was going to hit on was I feel like there's going to be situations where you as a new player will randomly pick a crisis for your opponent that's really good for your opponent, and there's not a lot you can do about it.
Yeah, so there are definitely some concerns about the new style, the new rules, and how they're going to end up working in the long term. But at the same time, I think as we get a more and more diverse pool of cards, that that's going to be an acceptable thing. But the other thing is it changes. It just changes so much. I think Josh, you've been playing this game pretty close to since its inception, right?
Um, Pretty much. I think my friend bought the starter kits on release day, and we played from there. But I didn't know anything about it until then, basically.
Okay, but long enough that you've been playing for about 2 years now,
Yeah, definitely.
and this is kind of the closest to a version 1.5 update to big change is probably as close as we can get without just jumping into a straight up Marvel Crisis Protocol 2.0. Roster building is going to be extremely different. And with that, because you're less sure of the setups, you're less sure of the point totals that you're going to be able to confirm, being able to have two different affiliations is going to be quite a bit more important than I think it previously was.
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely the biggest change we've seen so far in literally every way. Most of the changes we've had are just new content and slight little erratas to make sure that cards are working like they're. We've never had one be real core rule changes of this magnitude, and it's very exciting. Even the part I don't like is exciting, but it's all very exciting.
Yep. So that is a change that's coming for the most part. I think it's going to be a good change. And I think the thing that sticks with me the most from what they said from the stream is that this is how they want Marvel Crisis Protocol to be played. They want it to be a little bit more beer and pretzel casual, and make it so that the turn zero is not as big of an impact. I think turn zero is still a huge impact when you're roster building. The decisions you're making before the game actually starts are still bigger than most any other game that I have played in recent memory. But it takes away a little bit of that decision making process, which certainly makes it easier for a newcomer to come into, as well as everything else.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that I think that they did a good job describing, and something that I agree with, is this is a completely new system that's built from the ground up. There's none really like it. So having changes like these a couple years in is totally normal and fine. And I think
Hmm.
it's actually a good thing that they're willing to look back and say, you know what, we wanted it to be like this. We knew that we wanted these aspects, but it didn't really work out the way we envisioned. So rather than, you know, bury our head in the sand and say, well, we made the correct decision, just deal with it, they're willing to change things to make the game better. I think that's a great thing for the game moving towards.
Absolutely. And one of those other big changes that really only affects maybe 6 characters is the Infinity Gem rework. And so, how Infinity Gems currently work is that you will bring a character that can be a gem bearer, and then you bring the Infinity Gems, and they take up a character slot in your roster. They have now changed that so that instead of taking up a character slot in your roster and that kind of being that price for the gem, is that when you build your roster, you build it equipping the gems before anything else. That is part of your roster construction. So if you are bringing Thanos, you have to, like Thanos is in your 10, you have to at that point decide what gems he is going to be equipped with. And no matter what game you're going into, he has to have those gems equipped. So that would mean, like, if you bring Thanos with the mind and time gems,
Yep.
whenever you bring Thanos, you're not able to just be like, okay, well, I just want the mind gem. I just want 7 threat Thanos for this mission. You're not able to do that anymore. Uh, what do you think of this one?
I absolutely love this change. Um, I am a huge fan of Loki, and I love taking the Mind Gem with him. I think it
Hmm.
makes him a more well-rounded, completed character than when you take him without the Mind Gem. But my problem with taking him in rosters was he takes 2 roster slots. And that's a lot of tactical flexibility you lose out on just to take this one character. So a lot of the times he just got left out because I didn't only want to take 8 other characters. Now I can take him in one more, and I feel like I'm a lot more likely to bring him in my rosters. And I feel like a lot of other characters are going to fit that same bill. Star Lord, he's, you can say what you will about whether he's good or bad, but it definitely feels a lot better for him to only cost 1 roster slot than him to cost 2 roster slots.
Hmm.
The only negative to this, you talked about, if you bring Thanos with these 2 gems, he can only bring those 2 gems. I do think that some of that flexibility of bringing your cards or bringing your gems onto different characters, like if you have Star Lord and Ronan, or the reality gem between Thanos and Corvus, or even Loki with the Mind Gem and Thanos with the Mind Gem, we're going to lose a little bit of that. But I think for the most part, that's going to be fine. I think you'll just have people. You'll when you have that extra roster slot, you could put a character in that you would rather take over Mind Gem Loki or this Thanos or Ronan with the Power Gem or Doctor Strange with the Soul Gem. And it does make you commit if you took something like Doctor Strange with Time and Soul and you
Hmm.
decided which one you wanted to play right before you started the game. You do have to commit, but I still don't think that's a really bad place to be. I think the trade-off for the vast majority of people and lists is going to be well worth it.
Yeah, so it is both a buff and nerf. to Black Order in some regards, where it cuts down on their flexibility a lot because part of Thanos' great appeal was being able to flex your roster to where it needed to be point wise by moving and taking on and adding on and off the different gems. That's no longer an option, but they're probably going to be getting an average of 3 to 4 roster slots opened up, which can very easily be an affiliation all its own.
Tack that on with the new tactics cards they're going to be able to bring because they
Yep.
have 10 slots and dual affiliation is so much easier.
Yep. So I think there's a lot of pros and cons across the board, and overall, I'm a really big fan of this change. It changes it up. It takes away some of Black Order's flexibility, which is in part why they were really strong. And I think it was a needed change considering the crisis selection change, because I think Black Order could just steamroll, just push through these different missions by forcing their own kind of unique game plan, game style that they bring. And so locking them into different point totals hurts a lot more for them than it once did. But they now also have the backup plan of like, okay, well, now I can just bring in my affiliation B for this point total or for this mission setup.
Yeah, I think if it does what you say it does, and the new crisis selection helps with that too, I feel like particularly Black Order will be a much more enjoyable gameplay for people. And then when you're playing them, when you get into that situation, like you said, where it's a little bit harder for you to play, you can just play a different affiliation now. You can and get something that's going to be an enjoyable game.
Mm-hmm.
And it'll feel nice to go to your local game store with your list and it not just be 5 models, 6 models, because most of it's cards. It's going to feel good to bring your full 10 characters to the table and get to pick from there.
Yep. No easy painting competitions for your whole roster outs though. I guess that's a downside.
Unless they make you paint your cards, that might be a little bit more difficult.
That might be get interesting. All right, and so now finally, we're going to talk about their updated character cards, why they're doing it, how they're doing it, and just all of those different things. So the main reason that they're even able to do it is that the character cards that we have known and loved over the past 2 years are getting a pretty drastic change. So instead of the portrait style cards that we have, they're going to be on their sides, going to landscape. You know what? Here, I'll just throw up a early image of MODOK, and you can kind of see what I'm talking about. It looks drastically different, and there's a lot of complaints about that. We'll touch on that here in a second. But the reason that they are doing this is because Marvel Crisis Protocol is going multilingual, which I think is fantastic. And additionally, the style of these new cards is going to be a lot easier for people to be able to read for those who are colorblind or just don't have as good eyesight. This new orientation allows the letters to be a little bit bigger, the symbols to be a little bit bigger. And so, while I agree with a lot of people out there who are saying this doesn't look as nice as the older ones, but it's for the betterment of the game. It is being able to include more people. Uh, so at the end of the day, I can't be against that side of it.
I will say I am firmly in the camp of I think that these look less good than the old ones.
Yeah.
But I think I can be brought around with some color changes and some slight changes to it.
Yeah, and there's still time for that, quite frankly. So these are going to be up eventually digitally to download off of the website. That way, if you already have the cards, you can print them out, play with them, and you're good to go. Additionally, they predicted somewhere around Q2, Q3 of next year, they're going to be doing a card pack, which entails a lot, and there's a lot of questions around how that looks that we don't have the answer to at the moment. But they are doing a card pack, and it is going to come with all of these new cards. But because they are doing all of that, it also gave them the opportunity to go back and make some edit to some significant cards. And the first one we have up, as you guys have probably already read through if you don't already know of these changes, uh, Modok, for example, now has his Bow to the Will of Modok limited to once per turn instead of once per character per turn. And his P Brain Super Reroll ability is now limited to once per.
Ah, I hadn't caught that one. I did catch the other weird change with P-Brain, if I remember correctly, is that they fixed the timing on it. There was a ruling thing about when you could pay power to do the reroll
Mm-hmm.
that made it a little awkward, and it looks like they have fixed that wording as well on both him and I'm assuming the rest of the characters that had been affected by that change.
So far, it seems like most of the paid reroll timings have been fixed, so there's not that guesswork. You don't necessarily have perfect information, but much closer to. When you're entering the reroll dice steps, you know how many dice you want to reroll instead of having to be like, well, with this crit and depending on what my opponent rolls, which is a very welcome change going back to that style. Uh, so some really good changes for Modok. He was this terrifying control piece who is still by most accounts terrifying. He's still going to get off one ridiculously consistent attack per turn. It just won't be every single attack he makes. And Bout of the Will of Modok is limited to, like we've started seeing with other characters like Sinister and others, that making another character advance short is limited to once per turn.
Yeah, I think one of the things they mentioned in the stream is that they really wanted dynamic gameplay where characters were moving each other around a lot, and that was a big central part of designing characters. And now they've realized that in some cases it's a little too strong to be able to do all this movement in one character for so little commitment.
Mm-hmm.
So this bow change is fantastic. And his theme was always be a big scary turret that controls people and keeps himself safe. And he still does that, but now you're going to have to play him a little better and take a little bit more risk if you're wanting to get more work out of him. So he can still do all the things you like him to do for the most part if you've been playing Modok. But now he's just going to be a little bit easier for your opponent to deal with and not so much of a headache if they haven't brought very specific things to stop him.
Yep, I think this is a totally fine change. He was nerfed just really in his consistency and what he's able to output, but that was it. Everything else is still good. His reroll is back to where it kind of should be. In other, just kind of speaking about board control elements, the other character that they kind of put a downtick on is Shuri. And now her Panther Gauntlets can only push size 3 or less characters away short. It's still a consistent no matter what the push happens, but it's only on those size 3 or less characters. AMG talked about how they really enjoyed these board control elements, the pushes, and all of that kind of stuff, but they didn't realize how big of an impact it would have on the larger size characters or how valuable size on a character would become. And so with this chain, kind of showed like, hey, maybe made Shuri a bit too oppressive there, or Wakanda as a whole a little too oppressive. So maybe we also see a Black Panther push change coming. And then also we see her upgrades get the same timing as Modok's reroll ability.
Yeah, as someone who has played lots of Shuri in his time, this is such a great change. She wasn't as oppressive now as she was back at the start of the game, certainly, because there's so many good characters that have come out, and she's always been right there, still one of those kind of problem children, especially with like Dormammu coming out as a size 5. She could potentially just push him twice every turn and make him miserable.
Yeah,
And
and
now,
still most rosters, I think Shuri will still have complete control over, but it makes bringing a size 4 character with a short move a lot more viable.
right, she used to be able to shut down Hulk completely.
Hulk, Black Dwarf,
Black
list goes
Dwarf.
on.
But now she has a much more limited scope of what she can shoot and actually affect on the table. I wouldn't have been upset had they been more aggressive and made it only size 2. But even having any sizing restriction at all is such a positive change that I think it's fantastic.
Yeah.
And this is coming from someone who likes playing Shuri. I think this is a great change.
And then the next change we have is on a character that I have been a fan of for a really long time, and just kind of as time went on, definitely showed that he did not hold up as well. Unfortunately, I'm a huge Steve Rogers fan in this game, but they gave him some nice little incidental buffs, and really only just to one of his attacks, and that is shield throw. In addition to it now guaranteeing Steve a power from his long range attack, it's also now a 5 dice strike, which
Yeah,
is really handy.
I've been saying for a while too that Steve isn't super bad. He's just one tiny tick below most other 4 points, and I honestly thought that just getting the power on his shield throw would bring him in line with a lot of the others. And then they went ahead and gave him another die on the
Yep,
shield
give him
throw.
another die, but that's not the only changes. Josh, what's the last change?
So talking about sizing restrictions on Shuri, now his wild push on his strike and the throw on his shield slam attack have both been increased from size 2 only to size 3. So now he's going to be where Shuri is affecting a lower range of characters. Captain America is going to be able to affect a higher spread of characters with his displacement abilities.
And you know what? He's a super soldier. It makes sense.
It makes perfect sense, honestly. Especially because we have Sam Captain America that came out who can move a two. He can move size 2s on his shield throw, and I believe he can move size 3s on his throw attack.
His Red
Red
Wing.
Wing Assault.
Yeah.
So it only makes sense that if he can move size 3s as a normal human, our super soldier Captain America should be able to move size 3s as well.
Yeah, and this is some really nice buffs all around to Steve, giving him a little bit more control, so that while he is bodyguarding a point or something, he'll also be able to shove some other guys off of that point. But being able for Shield Throw to just get him consistent power will make him a good bit more tanky, just because he will always have access to that vibranium shield or bodyguard that much more consistently. All good things here.
Right. In my play time with him, I feel like a lot of activations turned into double shield throw and nothing else. And now it actually feels like you'll be rewarded for that because previously there was no good reason to. You would typically not do a lot of damage, you would get nothing in return, and you'd be feeding them power for doing damage to them. Now you get power back. You can do more bodyguards, more shield slams.
Yep,
It's
and adding
just
that extra dice adds that much better of a chance for the ricochet, which then means maybe 2 power off of a single one of these, which is really nice.
right, and a little bit more chance to get some real significant damage on someone. Whereas a 4 dice attack just typically doesn't get you there. 5 dice just feels a little bit more likely to actually pump some damage through, or even get that mythical one shot on someone who's being a problem.
And then finally, not the last in Spoilerland that we have received, they've talked about a couple of other things which we'll go over, but the last card that they showed us definitely is one of the most significant changes from the characters that we have seen thus far, and that is, of course, Hulk. And boy, are there changes. And I'm honestly starting to get a little bit terrified of what seeing him on the table might mean.
That's the way you were supposed to feel when he was released, though.
Yeah. So, changes real quick. His physical defense has gone from 2 to 3, or 2 to 4. His energy defense has gone from 2 to 3. His strike has been increased to a 7 dice normal instead of 6. And the much bigger deal there is that after the attack is resolved, this character gains power equal to the damage dealt, which is now slightly
Spicy.
terrifying since we've seen what She Hulk is able to do with that kind of stuff. And then there are two, well, I guess really 3 other changes, all in his superpowers. First is You Won't Like Me When I'm Angry. Instead of getting an extra die every 3 damage he's taken, it's going to be every 4 dice. So at most, he's rolling an extra 4, which is still pretty solid, especially considering he has like a beam attack and other things.
And also, with the extra die on his strike, it makes it a little bit more fair when you're getting him close to dead that he's uh, not throwing an actual fistful of dice at you every time he slaps you.
Yeah, so it kind of caps him out a little bit there, but his strike having that one buff, I think, balances out overall quite nicely. He is also now extremely notably immune to stun, which is one of the biggest issues I think Hulk had previously. Is just kind of power generation. So we're seeing two sides where his power generation is being fixed. One in that now him dealing damage can get him power back like most other characters in the game. But if you were able to stun Hulk and just start laying into him, he wasn't going to get a lot of power back to fight back with. That is no longer the case.
Yeah, especially with his strike not giving him power back. Originally, it was so hard to get power on him when he was stunned. The no way that you could actively get power on him was another problem. You had to rely on your opponent to feed him power if they wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
If they didn't just want to push him or throw him or bow to the will of MODOK him away and keep him gaining a single power a turn and doing literally nothing.
Yep. But the biggest change is he has a brand new superpower. It's a reactive one called Hulk Not Puny Banner, which is perfect. It costs 3, so it is a little bit expensive, but it says while this character is defending against a physical or energy attack during the modified die step of the attack, it may use the superpower. This character may reroll any number of its defense dice, including skulls. Oh,
Very good.
oh boy. So, in addition to just having now Omega Red, Hulkbuster level defense stats, which is a far improvement over what they were already, we also have a really nice defensive ability that has that same timing window as we've already seen on MODOK and Shuri of where we want the rerolls to be. But man, reroll all, reroll skulls. That's like Amazing Spider-Man in Miles' leadership, kind of good.
Yeah, there was one of the complaints I'd always heard about Hulk when he first came out was that he doesn't feel like the unstoppable rampage monster that they always envisioned him from the comics. And now with this reroll ability and his new stats and his new ability to gain power, it feels like they finally hit it. And it's like you said, it's kind of terrifying.
Yeah, like I've got a couple of test games in with Hulkbuster, and I was like, man, Hulkbuster's just gonna like shred Hulk. That is no longer the case. I do think that Hulkbuster is still a good matchup for Hulk because he does have the Shuri push, but no longer with the restriction. He just gets to push Hulk back, which is going to be handy because controlling Hulk is still going to be a necessary thing. It's just not going to be controlling Hulk by ignoring him. You now have to actively be concerned about Hulk, which is what needs to be said for a 6 threat character.
And it's so thematic too. I always feel like when you see the Hulkbuster, he doesn't actually stop the Hulk. He just he just slows the Hulk down until he either calms down or can get something that can stop the Hulk. And now we literally have that cinematic moment where, oh god, I can't stop him. I do not have the characters or the capability to get the Hulk off the table. I just have to keep pushing him away and keeping him off me as long as possible until I win or I make him the only thing on the table.
Yeah, I'm really excited to see those two go toe to toe now. Uh, a couple of the other changes that we both either know are coming or rather are not coming. One, Captain Marvel's binary form is going down to a cost of 4 power instead of 5, which will make that power a lot more consistent. Which I'm already a Captain Marvel fan, so now her in Brotherhood, her in A Force stand out even more so as a great option. But we also know that core Spider Man and core Doc Ock are two characters that are not getting changed whatsoever.
I know that's going to make a lot of people upset, but I actually agree with that because I think that they are very, very close to very fine or close to fine for their point cost and for what they do.
Yeah, honestly, I think people underrate Doc Ock and what he's capable of as a 3 threat. He's pretty darn tanky. He's got some really great range. He's got great power generation. So I think Doc Ock's fine. I wouldn't have minded seeing like one stamina point on Peter, core Peter, go up. But at the end of the day, he's still, you probably still only really take him in Web Warriors, but he still does absolute work in Web Warriors, and now he's able to be taken alongside ASM. Uh, just all good things.
Right. And I think one of the things that, in particular, Doc Ock, that makes people undervalue Doc Ock are a lot of these characters like Shuri and some of the other three pointers in his bracket that do a little more than I think they wanted a three pointer to do. And if they're going to be addressing characters like that, we may see the stock of Doc Ock go up by him not being touched and most of the others getting touched.
Mm-hmm.
Which I think is a good thing. Because, like I said, I think when you look at Doc Ock, it can be a little hard to see, but what you mentioned with his ranges keep him pretty significantly relevant throughout the game on a medium base. He actually threatens a good bit of the board for a three-pointer. And I think people just don't take him because it's way easier to put a Valkyrie or a Shuri in. But if that's not an option, Doc Ock's looking a lot better.
Yep. So I'll also go ahead and say the cards that we have shown, you can pull images off of Facebook or one of the multiple Discords, print them out, start trying them, but know that they may not be exactly fully balanced because characters are still going through testing, and we haven't seen all of the other changes that other characters are getting. So that said, I'm absolutely going to print out Hulk's card, and this upcoming next opportunity I get, he's going to get to see the table.
Yeah, I think Hulk's the most exciting out of this set. Just
oh gosh,
he looks so fun now. He looks like an absolute blast to play.
You talked about Killmonger and needing to be seeing the table more, and I think Hulkbuster and Hulk also a little bit meta talk. Maybe we start seeing a little bit more Killmonger.
Yeah, I think so. Which is the exciting thing about all these change-ups is it doesn't just, like talking about Doc Ock, it doesn't just affect the characters that we're playing or that are being changed. It's also going to affect everything around them, how they interact with other characters that become more viable or more desirable because they hurt or help those characters. It's just the game is going to have some significant changes here in the next few months, and it's extremely exciting.
Yeah. So something I will freely and fully admit, after NashCon, I was a little bit burnt on MCP. I just kind of, I think, naturally happens sometimes, and it taking 2 years is a pretty good window for having to finally get burnt out a little bit on something. Still making content, still excited for things, and NashCon, when you're just pouring a solid month's worth of work into then a full weekend of nonstop, just kind of tired me out. But man, I was giddy when we got into this last panel and they started talking about some of these changes and really reignited how excited I am for this game. So if you're just getting into the game, you're coming in at a fantastic point. If you are a veteran of the game, I hope you're as excited as I am because I am ecstatic.
Yeah, this is absolutely the good times for Marvel Crisis Protocol. I kind of mirror that. I was a little burnt, not so much because I didn't want to play. It's just I felt like I'd done the things I wanted to do, and I didn't know what to do next. So I was kind of lost and playing some other games and thinking about Marvel and what I wanted to do. And now all these new changes coming up, I want the new changes, and I want to get these things on the table. I want to play with the new stuff. It feels like we're about to be playing a new game again, and a lot of these characters that I've looked at before and wanted to play, like Hulk and Captain America, now look really appealing, and even more characters are going to feel that way coming up soon.
Yeah, I'm excited to see. They said it's going to be about the first 50 to 60-ish characters that they're looking at. It's basically like all the way up to through the Guardians up to like where we started getting Defenders in Criminal Syndicate. But then also we'll just get cards with erratas. So like Angela and her living ribbons is going to be errated to like the actual correct text now, and some small things like that are also going to be some really nice upgrades.
Yeah, if I can wish list for 2 seconds, the two I want to see the most on coming up, I want to see Iron Man and I want to see Ghost Rider.
Personally, I think Iron Man has a little bit of a better home now with Sam Spam, as Justin well proved, especially now that he has the Helios laser to play in there. I think that's going to be sweet. But I think Ultron and Green Goblin are the two that I want to see. The two that are probably hurt the most by drop offs banning. I think AMG now has a chance to go in and correct for those characters who were kind of hurt by that.
Yeah, I can see that. Another one I would like to honorably mention, I don't play him very much, is Star Lord.
Yep, I think the Guardians as a whole might come out of this looking real nice.
Yeah, I'm really ecstatic for some of those characters to see play. I think the first wave of characters saw the most highs and lows of any group of characters because they were still trying to find their stride on how to make these characters feel balanced and feel flavorful. And all the newer characters coming out have all felt great. They haven't felt most of them haven't felt one end of the extreme or the other. I think that going back, changing, pulling them all closer to that middle ground is going to really breathe fresh life into them.
Yep, give us that little chef's kiss. All right, so those are our thoughts on all of these changes. Feel free to let us know what you think down below in the description. It'll also enter you in this month's giveaway. As well, I want to say if you have listened to this and are going to Gen Con this year, uh, give me a shout. I'm actually going to be at Gen Con all 4 days. I'm super excited to get to go to a big convention again. I'll have some MCP stuff, so maybe even try to get a game in while I'm up there. So feel free to reach out to me via Facebook, my email, etc., etc. I know Dan, I think, even has a group chat for people going. So feel free to reach out there. Again, listen to Advanced R&D if you get the chance. It's a very fun podcast slash format where you build just some absolute jank fun lists and then pit them against another fun jank list that had some restrictions thrown in there. So really enjoy what Josh and Kenny do and what they do for the community with that. All right, guys. So last thing that we want to mention slash say is that none of these have been written out in rule form for us to digest yet. So none of these are official. Obviously, if you want to try some of these new things, add that 10th tactic card, start drawing a single random crisis, etc., etc., do that, but all the official stuff is still being tested. They want to make sure everything's good, including all these character cards. They have said by the end of this year, so it's coming and coming relatively soon. We've only got 3 months left, but up. So keep an eye out either here or through AMG's official channels for any updates like that. I'm sure I will be going through with many different people, or maybe just Josh if he puts up with me long enough, talking about how all these new affiliations come out on the other.
Yeah, I'm definitely up for coming back to talk about these. Like I said, I'm super excited for all these changes. Uh, it helps me parse out some of the new changes and how they work too to talk about them. So discussing them with people would be absolutely awesome.
Awesome. Well, I look forward to that. Thank you all for watching. I hope you are just excited as we are for all of this. And until next time, keep on gaming.